工作时都会有一些比较白目的同事，除了深呼吸之外，还有什么有效的方法可以让我们保持这个沟通，而且甚至可以让事情更有效率呢？Hello， 欢迎来到 Executive Plus 主管与沟通力的 Podcast。I'm Sherry, an educator, certified coach, and style enthusiast. 我相信专业有效的沟通是语言跟逻辑的完美结合。
And I'm Nick, a startup consultant, corporate trainer, and late-night gaming junkie. I believe great communication requires the right mindset and solid frameworks.
我们希望带给大家职场英语的技能、跨文化沟通技巧与其他能帮助您成为出色领导者的工具。
Join us each week as we share our experience, research, and methodologies to take your communication and language skills from good to great. Hey everybody, welcome back to another Executive Plus podcast. Today's episode, how to deal with stupid people. Well, not necessarily stupid. We're going to bring it down more too.
Yeah.
Clueless basically is how do you talk to people who are usually very unaware of what they have said? Whether it's they're a little bit clueless, maybe they're distracted, or someone who's not a great listener. What tips and techniques can we use to communicate to get our point across without offending or getting upset ourselves?
Right, 应该很多人都有类似的经验啦。不管是某一些人，他可能是一些永远都搞不太清楚状况，或者有一些人可能真的是经验不太够，所以会有一点 clueless. So not necessarily stupid, 但是或者有一些人他特别的没有办法很专注，他常常会分心，你跟他讲话讲到一半，你就觉得他好像已经飘到别的地方了。所以碰到这种人的时候，我们该怎么样来沟通，该怎么样跟他来对话，也能够确认自己不会变得很生气，然后也可以很顺利的去做这个有效的沟通。And this episode is actually inspired by these two characters in Schitt's Creek, which is one of my favorite TV shows.
Right. So if you caught our podcast episode about shows that you can watch to relax, we talk about this show. And specifically in the show, there's a character named Alexis. She used to be a socialite, center of everyone's attention. And she goes to a small town and she meets a veterinarian. And she's just kind of airheaded.
That's a good term. 就好像那个脑筋里面只有空气的感觉。So she's definitely not stupid, but her character is very much like she just never really had a lot of education. 她跟她前男朋友呢，她前男朋友是一个 vet， 也就是一个宠物医师，然后她就在这个宠物医师的这个 office 里面就开始工作了。然后她就问她的这个前男友，也是 Ted， 就说You know, in the interview that you mentioned, we got like 2 weeks break. So I'm just wondering how many 2 weeks break did I get? 那大家应该都知道2个礼拜的这样的假期通常都是很 standard, right? 1年之内只有这2个礼拜。那他就觉得说我有几个那个2个礼拜的 break 可以拿。So Ted 他没有生气，他只有微笑的就说Why don't we just start with that one and see? 那我觉得他这个回应还蛮聪明的。
Yeah, so it's because he doesn't get upset, he doesn't like point out her ridiculousness or stupidity, he just very firmly and politely states, why don't we just start with the one and then we'll go from there and we'll see, right? So the idea is just he is polite about it and she gets it. She's not like, oh, I don't understand. Like, it's very clear. But it still walks away where he probably laughs it off a little bit and then she goes about her day.
Yeah, and sometimes it's really no point to get really upset on these kind of people if they're clueless 或者是他们很容易分心。你对他生气，你自己很情绪的话，其实也没有办法改变他这样的个性。So today we actually just want to share some tips on how do you effectively communicate in this kind of situation. Let's start with tip number 1, which is something I love and I think everyone needs to understand is smile, pause, and breathe.
Yeah, it sounds simple, but a lot of times is, again, our gut reaction would just be like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Did you really just say that and just like get really upset? But again, sometimes it's not that this person is trying to be stupid. Sometimes their brain is just somewhere else. Yeah. Or that person's just not a good listener, and it's not that they didn't care. They just weren't really paying attention. So by smiling and breathing, you can kind of just go, okay, this person probably has the best of intentions. I'll just answer the question.
So step number 2 is begin with praise. 那我们找到这个 source 就讲到说 we're all narcissists, so works for everybody. I mean, 每个人都很喜欢 praise, right? You can't, I'm not going to deny that. So let's give them some example. What kind of praise that you can actually give in this kind of situation?
One praise that you'll actually hear pretty often is something like, oh, that's a great question.
Yeah, Nick uses it on me all the time.
There's a little bit of sarcasm, which we'll do an episode on sarcasm later. But praise can just be like, you know, I'm glad you asked that. Or, oh, it's good that you brought that up.
Oh, that's a good one too. Yeah, that's less sarcastic. I'm glad you brought that up. I think it's great that you're asking this question. Yeah. So these are genuine praise.
So it's genuine praise, but it also, again, when someone is either easily distracted or you can tell that they're thinking about other things, when you call out, that was a really important question, it sometimes brings their attention back, even for a second, to listen to your answer.
Yeah, because when you say that, and I think everyone's immediate reaction would be, oh, I asked a great question. 真的吗？所以他就想继续听下去。So now tip number 3, speak slowly and use fewer words. And I think this is really great.
Yeah, and this is important from the standpoint of it helps you be clear. But 2, again, if you go into this big, long explanation or you start using big words, this person who already has a tendency maybe not to be a great listener or not to be really focused, if you start doing that, they're just immediately going to go elsewhere and you're going to get into a frustration loop, just repeating the same things over and over again.
Now, 这个部分呢，我觉得有一个大家常常会用的一个 analogy， 也就是不是有些人会说，诶，当你在解释给我听的时候 pretend I'm like a 5-year-old or pretend I'm 3-year-old and explain this to me. 我觉得这边有一点类似像用同样的这样子的方式。Because think about this, if you wanted to explain something to someone that's 5-year-old, and I always imagine my daughter. If I need to explain a very difficult concept to a 5-year-old, I need to really make it very concise and I need to slow it down. Like I need to make it very clear. 所以这个时候就是讲的不是说你讲的速度很慢，意思就是我觉得就是你把重点的东西你慢慢的讲，然后呢，也用比较少的字，能用比较少的字就用少的字来去形容这件事情。
Yeah, that's a really good piece of advice. There's actually, on the internet, there's a theme called Explain Like I'm 5. And there's entire forums or Reddit, if you're familiar with that, where people like ask, explain black holes to me. Explain like I'm 5. And people are very good at explaining like how these things work. So that's a really good mindset to get into is if you need to explain either a difficult concept or something that is very critical to get done, to do that. Like, okay, how would I explain this to a child? It may seem a little demeaning, but a lot of times it's a very good way to see if you understand the core concepts and if you can pass that to somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely. 那接下来我觉得这个 tip 非常好。End your sentence with a declarative statement, so your inflection is down. Inflection 意思就是说这个声调是往下的，也就是听起来就是一个 statement 而不是一个问题。
And this is usually because you're not trying to invite more conversation. You're just answering the question. So in the example that we gave at the beginning of the episode, talking about Alexis talking to her boss, he didn't ask her like, well, what do you think? How many weeks? And that would be a very like Socratic method, like having them come to a conclusion. But in this case, again, we're just giving information. So it's just, why don't we? And then give a statement or let's do this and then tell them what to do.
所以非常简单 but you're really just giving a statement 而且你不会变成会 invite 有更多的 questions. Yeah. So next point, which is speak in bullet point.
This is really tied to that idea of like speak slowly and fewer words. A quick tip is when you're explaining something, if you do it in terms of bullet points, it's easier for someone to follow. If you gave someone, for example, an instruction list of like how to go somewhere, and you just did it as one long sentence without breathing, it's very unlikely that they will get what you want to say. But if you want to give someone directions or an instruction list, or you want something to do, and you're just like, okay, the first thing I need you to do is this. The second thing you should handle is this. The third thing. That in their mind then is very easy to parse out and separate. Okay, there are 4 things I need to complete. 1, 2, 3, 4.
所以就是把要求对方现在要做的事情，你把它变得很简单的，就是步骤。然后这每个步骤呢，我们刚刚也有讲嘛，用少一点的字去形容。So do this, number 1, number 2, do that, number 3, end with that, right? 就是让它变成是1、2、3的这样的步骤，能够让他们很好的去 follow. And 而且啊，我觉得有的时候你会发现，当你要做一件事情是你很不熟悉的 ，like for example, when I started working on the sales floor at Burberry, I really was clueless and I had no idea what I'm supposed to do, even for a very simple task. You know, like ring someone up at the cash register. I still didn't know what to do. So my boss, like she explained to me in long sentences. I just looked at her like, please tell me steps. Just give me very straightforward steps. 所以我觉得有的时候可能并不是说 OK 这个人真的很白目 you know, stupid. I think sometimes things could be very overwhelming, and I think these tips will really works for that kind of situation as well.
Yeah, this is definitely that piece of advice where oftentimes when we're a professional at something or we've been doing something long enough, we just assume everything is intuitive. Like you should understand that. So I'm someone who's never really had a problem with technology, searching the internet. So when people ask me questions, my first thought is always, why did you not Google it? Or I'll sometimes run into that where it's like the majority of your answers are going to be in English. But in Taiwan, if you're like, why don't you Google it? The first thing people do is Google in Chinese. But then you're just going to get less search results overall because a lot of this information is probably primarily in English first. Things that we assume are intuitive for someone new to your company, new to the job, or maybe, again, they're just a little bit spacey and not always focused, can't always assume that they know what's going on. So there's a fun phrase that's never assume and makes an ass out of you and me.
I like that, right? Get it? Ass, you, me, assume.
Yeah. Well, we hope that you enjoy this episode, and the next time someone makes a statement that makes your blood boil or just get fire in your veins, remember, follow the steps. Smile, breathe. Start with praise, speak slowly, end your sentence with a declarative statement, and if you can, break it down into bullet points. We'll talk to you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.
The Executive Plus podcast is a Presentality Group production, produced and hosted by Sherry Fang and Nick Howard. You can search us on Facebook, 主管英文 Executive Plus. You can also find us on Instagram, Communication R&D, and email us at sherry@epstyleplus.com.